Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guildhouse. This is a weekly podcast where I, your host, Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across the DMs Guild and tabletop RPG space. And this week, I am joyed to be joined by Lucas Zellers. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Matthew. It's great. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, getting out of the bat, it's not only fellow DMs Guild creator, but fellow podcast host.
That's right. Yeah. So I host a podcast called Making a Monster, and the DMs Guild has been my primary source of guests for that. I look at just the monsters and just one designer and one monster at a time. And we break down how it works, why it works, and what it means. And I've been very surprised to find just a wealth of meaning and culture behind every single monster, even the ones that were supposed to be a joke.
Yeah, I was going to say, especially when it comes to monster creation, I imagine the DM's Guild is quite a deep mine. You're not going to be running out of people to chat to anytime soon.
Yeah, it's our stock and trade, and D&D as a system relies heavily on its monsters. It's not true of every system, but it's true of this one. And if you've got a good monster, you've got a good story, and that's why I wanted to do my podcast in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I guess kind of have you kind of like since starting your podcast and stuff like that, have you been have you found that it's maybe starting to bleed into any of the sort of DMs Guild work that you might be doing?
It has. You know what? I'll tell you, some of the best things that have happened to me D&D wise have happened on Discord.
Yeah.
There's a couple of servers, and I'm finding new ones every day. That just like it's a small world out there, and the people that I have met, the people that I've been introduced to because of the Making a Monster project, have also been the kinds of people that I would want to work with and collaborate with on DMs Guild products. So absolutely, they're lockstep, they're hand in hand.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I kind of mentioned the thing of like when people talk about, what's a good way to kind of network and sort of, get your name out. I think one is obviously get involved in collaborations. That's always a good one. Two, start a podcast. It turns out it's actually a really good way to, meet people and kind of have these sort of chit chats. And what I always find a little bit fascinating is always being a podcast host on someone else's podcast where you have it's hard to turn off that sort of like switch of like, I should try and fit a question in here somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the one thing that people love to do is tell you about themselves. And I don't mean that in like a disparaging way, especially for D&D. Like this is something that we're all on some level very passionate about. So it's very easy to get people to talk about it, and podcasting is a great way to do that, especially if you can come to them and say, yes, I'm going to spend a week of my time getting involved in you and your creative process. People are extremely helpful to me as a podcast host.
I think as well what's interesting about obviously like making a monster is the fact that designing a monster is sometimes a design challenge in itself. And there's so many like ways you can sort of tackle, again, creating a monster. You either start with a sort of idea of like a look for what a creature does, and then you kind of try and like reverse engineer of like, okay, well, it has, again, let's say it has 10 eyes, and on these eye stalks can shoot beams. And then it's like, okay, well, how do I translate that into a mechanical system? Or vice versa, you come up with a really like crunchy rule saying, it would be really cool if this monster had the ability to duplicate in some way. But then it's like, well, what could we make this monster look like? What's the kind of those two kind of aspects kind of bounce hand in hand, and especially when you come into a design challenge, the process you kind of think through them and eventually overcome it is kind of an interesting conversation that I'm sure people are kind of happy to solve.
Oh yeah. And the way it starts, a lot of people, I ask people what their favorite monster is, And I'm finding it's not a very fair question, because it could be their favorite monster mechanically. It could be the favorite thing that they do. It could be their favorite monster, the one that just looks the coolest, or the one that they really enjoyed. My favorite interviews are the ones where it's the monster that's their favorite story-wise, that it's an interesting question, or it teaches us something new about the world that we live in. And all of those, like, you can find all of those in monsters, even the goofy ones. So it's a very easy way to have a focused conversation. And the episodes all come down to 15 minutes at a time.
I was going to say, hearing you say that, it immediately, again, I'm loving now that I'm the host. What is your favorite monster? I've been meaning to ask that.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah,
okay.
I've got you now.
No, you really haven't. This is a very easy question for me to answer, because in the D&D context, like, there are other things. If this were another thing, I might talk about Godzilla. I love Godzilla and all that it means and was. But my favorite monster in a D&D context has been and always will be the Displacer Beast. It's one of a handful of original monsters to come out of Dungeons and Dragons. It's bat crap bonkers.
Yeah.
And it has this long sort of oral history of an instinctual enmity with blink dogs.
Yep.
Those two are not, so the Displacer Beast, if anybody doesn't know, let me please be the first to tell you.
Paint the scene.
It's a creature that always, it's basically a panther with 6 legs and 2 tentacles. But the trick is, it always appears to be 3 feet away from where it actually is, which is crazy cool. Yeah. Someone within the past 50-ish years of D&D storytelling decided that the creature that was bred to oppose or to hunt the Displacer Beast would be a creature with the ability to teleport. I don't know how those two are considered two sides of the same coin, or how those two are related. But I really want to tease that out. So at some point, there will be a Making the Monster episode about why, how, what.
Yeah, I guess it's a curious thing, because I imagine, like, even though, like, blink dogs and Displacer beasts, they're kind of meant to be, like, natural like rivals. And I think obviously if you would think of, like, if I were to create a monster that would counter a Displacer Beast, I would give it like some form of true sight, or something. But I feel like they kind of wanted to keep it even. Like, it's like a fight that, like, would go on forever.
Right.
With, like, the blink dog never being able to quite land an attack before sort of, like, again, blinking away. But no,
it's very
love
good.
it because they also have their kind of lore set within the Feywild. And that's a whole again. I've been dipping my toes into the Fey pond. I'm gonna go with that for a while now, and I don't know. It's just fun to sort of write that sort of, like, whimsical content.
It's also, I'll tell you, it's the first D&D creature I ever saw. My dad played D&D back in, whenever my dad would have been in high school. And I found his monster manual, and the first creature that I flipped to, that I really hung up on, was the Displacer Beast. And it was, those old splodgy kind of ink blot first edition illustrations, and yet it was just so compelling. So that's my favorite monster, is the Displacer Beast. No,
it definitely is. Yeah, it's again. I feel like, again, D&D is rife with exciting, cool monsters, and that's kind of what's great. I mean, they fill a whole book with every edition of the monster manual, and with the sort of add-ons and stuff like that. And that's what I kind of love. I kind of like, it does often feed into, like, my personal adventure design, because reading monsters naturally just, like, brings up inspiration of, like, cool situations to kind of sort of, like, throw them in. I think there's the I think it's called, is it the Zorbu, which are essentially in the jungles of Chul. I think they're little bears that eat things. And we're doing it live.
Zorby.
And it was just the idea of, like, these are literally the most aggressive little I'm kicking myself for not getting the name, but essentially, yeah, just eating stuff. And I was like, you know what? Like, they're a low CR creature, but just having enough of them would really like stormtroopers, Ewoks sort of thing. Of like, it doesn't matter if you get 10 of them. There's more. And yeah, I highly recommend I always like it's quite easy to sort of flip through the sort of monster manual or whatever sort of book and just sort of find yourself, I guess, latching onto a monster in particular.
Oh yeah, it's good reading. And I read a lot of old edition books whenever I can find them. I have only ever played 4th and 5th edition, so I don't understand at all what's happening on the stats page, but I love the flavor text and the lore.
Yeah. And I think that's what's kind of interesting is there's obviously there is a sometimes lore variance between the editions, but 9 times out of 10, like things are pretty true to the way things were within the 1st edition. I think talking about like the ink spot images, like have you seen the sort of original art of the beholder?
It's not coming to mind, but I'm sure I know what you're thinking of.
It's a doozy. It's literally like in nowadays, obviously with the development of digital art and stuff like that, they really sort of depict this sort of monstrous thing. And in like the early editions, it does kind of look like a circle with some googly eyes. But again, it's the case of and sometimes that in itself is deeply sort of evocative. So I guess to pivot then a little bit away from monsters and more to your products and stuff on the sort of the DMs Guild then. For the people listening, what sort of things have you kind of published? What have you thrown out there?
Yeah, so me and the DMs Guild, I'm going to jump ahead. I started in March of 2018. I put out an adventure. It was a one-shot adventure called The Contract that can be played in more than 1,000 ways, each one with wildly different results. And I did that because I wanted an adventure I could run for anyone, whether they'd played the game before at all, whether they hadn't, or whether they had played it with me last week, which happened quite a bit. And ever since then, it's been just kind of a short series of, whatever I was thinking of at the time. And my catalog is pretty slim. There's 2 replayable one-shot adventures, 3 subclasses, and then a handful of miniatures that I found. I found a way to print them at home.
Yeah.
And I do not have the patience or funds really for painting minis.
Yeah.
So that was just something, and it was a great project that I spent too long on. The one that I just released is called Chilling Tales from the Whispering Wind, which was a collaboration I did with, I don't know, maybe 10 other DMs Guild creators. And it went great. So if anybody's playing in Icewind Dale, or if you're just cold and you want an adventure that feels like winter, check it out.
I mean, what is it? Christmas is just around the corner, I think. So immediately the kind of first sort of question I kind of want to ask is with the procedural adventures in particular, what are some of the ways that you manage to sort of, again, provide nearly 1,000 different outcomes?
Yeah, so it depends how you count it. But so for the contract, it's not a spoiler at all to say that each of the major plot points are determined by random die rolls. So it's the same setup every time you play it. You are hired to keep a powerful merchant's heir safe from an assassin for the night. Who they are, why they're there, and what methods they use to assassinate the heir, they change every time. Yeah. And so your tactics and your experience and your motivations have to change as a player every time. Yeah. But it is the same setup. It's the same story. The heir lives until morning, and that's the story every time. When I did Town Musicians of Bremen, I based that off of a German, I think it's one of Grimm's fairy tales. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm not the only person to have used this source material. So there's more than one Town Musicians of Bremen on the DMs Guild. Mine was a straight line travel story. So in every version of that, you start somewhere and you are going to Bremen and you never get there. And the road is different every time you travel it. The things that you encounter change, and the lessons that you learn, or the tactics that you have to use change every time you play that adventure, but it's always the same story. And I think there's something very true to life about that. You know, in a sense, everything's a remix. There are only, I've heard as little as there are only 2 stories that have ever been told. By the way, those 2 stories are The Voyage of Discovery and A Stranger Comes to Town. It's really interesting. It's a really interesting bit of literary theory. So yeah, that's how I did it. I just told the same story, and you can experience it in slightly different ways.
No, I think what's kind of fascinating about the the contract in particular is the fact that even though it has the same premise every time, I mean, the fact that it's one person who potentially has, I don't know, 24 assassins always after them, and it kind of allows itself to be like almost like a recurring character of like, oh, by the way, guys, it turns out there's another assassin after me this week. Like,
that's a thought. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think of that. There's a podcast there waiting to happen where we just play the contract like 12 times in a row.
Yeah, it's just what wacky antics could the assassin get up to this time? No, I guess so. One of the things, again, I always find kind of fascinating about when it comes to random events with adventures and stuff like that is because as a writer, sometimes it's challenging and stuff like that, because the moment you go into sort of random, you have the option of like, well, now I have to come up with X number of possibilities, and I kind of have to make sure that each of them is kind of equally fleshed out. Right. I'm curious about how you sort of navigated that balance exactly.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So for the contract, I just play tested the heck out of it. I ran it as many times for as many people as I could, and several people were kind enough to do the same adventure for me like 3 times, and I'm very grateful to them.
I was going to say, was it? So this is playthrough 783.
No, not
now
really.
We need to track the next combination.
Oh man, I couldn't possibly. I wanted an adventure that's inexhaustible. Did you know if you shuffle a deck of cards, it's very likely that you will have an order that has never before been seen or will be seen again?
So actually, I should preface this with why this is kind of so interesting, is the fact that I've written it's in the process of coming out soon, is me and a bunch of other sort of fantastic collaborators. We've taken the Tarokka deck from Curse of Strahd, and we've turned each of the sort of cards into into characters like NPCs, and then as you sort of draw from the Tarokka deck, you can procedurally generate adventures where one card is the objective giver, one character is like a friend, and one is a foe. And yeah, I think that ends up being like 64,000 like different unique possibilities. And that's great to sort of slap on the cover to be like, yeah, no, there's 64,000 adventures in this bad boy, you know. Endless fun.
Yeah, you can't. That's honestly, that's a lot more thought out than the way I did it. I just had the same story beats every time. So you're gonna hit the same story beats. In the contract, it's the long watch, a certain number of hours before the assassin arrives, the assassination attempt itself, which is a combat encounter, the plot twist, and then in the Town Musicians of Bremen, it's the 4 characters from the story: the cat, the donkey, the dog, the cat, and the rooster, and then the thieves' house. So for me, it was just, it's going to be the same story, and you're going to have these same story beats, and I just randomized each story beat, which is a lot more low tech, I think, than doing a whole deck of cards for different story elements.
But then I guess it's this sort of the case of where it's again, there's the idea of something being very sort of lightweight and just easy to use. I mean, it's, talking about like accessibility. It's the fact that picking up, the Town Musicians of Bremen is again, if your party is traveling between locations, it's kind of like a no-brainer of like, here's something, we could just easily slip in and the party are none the wiser that maybe they've played this before.
Yeah, and I made it for game masters. I wanted an adventure that I could run on 10, 20 minutes notice. And if you've run the contract once, you can run it 1,000 times.
So I guess one of my questions then is, so if we take, was it like the picking the assassin, for example, and stuff like that, what essentially did, like, I imagine it appears as a table.
Yeah.
And what was kind of like, how did you sort of flesh out the options? Was it more of a case of like a druid or like a...
So D&D is very kind to game designers in this regard, in that it has a monster manual. So I just setting it in a port city made it very cosmopolitan. It's extremely likely that any sort of person or creature could be there. So I just filtered by challenge rating and just pulled a handful of the ones that I thought were most interesting. Or that would make an interesting encounter on their own, especially with it being the only combat encounter of the session. So yeah, I just took what D&D had to offer with the contract. With Town Musicians, I had to find ones that were thematically appropriate for the rooster, the cat, the dog, and the donkey. And some of that took some doing. I wrote a stat block for a were-vulture,
Nice.
which is one of, I think, my more regrettable monster design decisions.
Really? Any particular reason why? Or
it's hokey. Like, why? There's there's a reason that that werewolves exist in culture. That story was always going to exist in one way or another. It says something. A wolf occupied a very particular position in folklore, and the monster as a harbinger of category crisis. So is it human or animal or something in between? And that's what makes it monstrous. That's the real core and meat of what makes werewolves interesting. If you just take the prefix were and slap it on any random animal, it kind of cheapens that experience. Which is what I definitely did for were-vulture.
See, I don't know. See, I feel like there's definitely a place for it, because I feel like, particularly because was it in the monster manual, you have the obviously werewolf, werebear, wereboar, wererat, and what I kind of like that they, and obviously were-tiger. I think for me, were-tiger is probably the weakest. But what they kind of do is they do kind of flesh them out, how, like, you kind of take on sort of the sensibilities of the animal, and obviously wolf being the sort of archetypal, most sort of identifiable, but looking at like how the were-rats sort of are very sort of like naturally sneaky and community driven. The were-bears are lawful good.
For some reason.
But I don't know. I feel like, again, even though you say, like, I feel like there is a play space with like a were-vulture, in the sense that, like, being a sort of like, I don't know, like I feel like a death-driven person in the weirdest of ways.
And vultures definitely have their own place in folklore and story. And I think you're probably right. I don't think I may not be being fair to were creatures, but I do think it's this addition that we've added to the lycanthropy canon, and there's a place for it. You're right. I guess I'm a little bit of a purist in that regard. Like, I want to know where my monsters come from, and I want to know that they mean what they mean.
No, I was gonna say that's fair. Coming from the host of Making a Monster. I think but no, I guess here's the thing. If we were to get a tier list, I would say were-vulture is probably above were-tiger for me personally. Again, this is where, like, I have like the die-hard were-tiger fan base comes out and tries to, like, goes for my throat. But,
I was about to say, where would they come from? But they're out there. You know who you are.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, that's the problem. Is, like, with were people, you don't know. Like, I haven't seen the moon in days. Like, so it's more than possible that at any point they could just come out of the walls. But no. Sort of like the design challenge of, like, procedural adventures, and that's why I think personally, like, in terms of hardcover books, I naturally gravitate towards Waterdeep Dragon Heist, because they provide 4 seasons, and each that kind of adds its own sort of flavor or sort of trendy.
again, writing adventures that kind of tie into the Whitby Dragonheart stuff. I don't know why I do it to myself. Is because 9 times out of 10 you kind of have to write. Sometimes you have to write 4 different adventures in one, or you have to try and navigate that space. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's kind of nice to sort of as a creator for the DMs Guild is again provide the tools to sort of suit any table, because you don't really have. Well, again, you don't necessarily know how the DM is going to be approaching it, and if you want to kind of fill that spot of, oh yeah, I 20 minutes, I need something. what can I get? And what was it? Yeah, I believe the contract itself is currently a platinum seller.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's only that way because it's so old. When I put it up in March 2018, there just wasn't as much stuff on the DMs Guild, or as much good stuff. I think in the past 4 years or so, since since the platform has been live, and certainly in the last 2, there has been a lot of attention given to it, and a lot of people are doing really, really, really professional level work on the DMs Guild. So I'm glad I got to it when I did, or I don't know that the contract would have had the future that it does.
I was going to say, was the near explosion of the DMs Guild somewhat coincides with my arrival on the scene? And I don't want to say correlation is causation, but I mean there's that's one in the evidence pile. But no, 100. Yeah, you are right. I think I say this a lot, but you can attribute the RPG Writer Workshop to be a huge sort of way of bringing attention over to the DMs Guild, and bit by bit Wizards of the Coast have kind of gone out of their way to sort of shine a light on DMs Guild creators and everything. So yeah, I think that the sky's the limit. I think it's only going to sort of continue to sort of expand and grow. Well, to sort of bring it back around then to your creative process and everything then, and again, thank you for indulging me in the chat about randomly generating stuff. What's when you sit down to actually come and write, what is your kind of favorite part of the process?
My favorite part of the project? When it comes to publishing, it's art and layout. By that point, you will have solved all of the technical writing challenges that you're going to solve. You've edited this as much as you're going to edit it. And now it's just taking what you've done that is mechanically sound and putting it together into a document that's going to be a great experience to read. Anthony Joyce is really good at this. Whoever does layout for his adventures knows how to make a cohesive piece with its own style and internal experience. So
that's Gordon McAlpin. I believe Gordon is a graphic designer by trade. So it kind of
he's very good. He's very good.
But you were sort of saying, and so you actually you kind of you enjoy digging into sort of the layout process and kind of finding art and
well, and it's not something that I'm great at. I don't have the training or the software for it, but it's my favorite stage of the process. When I was collaborating on Chilling Tales, we had people who were doing art and layout, and by the time they were the last people to get everything before we were ready to publish. So by that point, it became a matter of putting the finishing touches on it and celebrating each other's work. And it started to feel real. Like it wasn't something that we had scribbled on graph paper. It was a real thing with great art. And it was part of a greater whole. So there, my creative process as such changes. And I do a lot of different, I have a lot of different creative works and hobbies. But for this one, it's art and layout. It's an extremely rewarding part of it.
And I guess so. In talking about so for the sort of non-collaborative projects, I suppose. I'm always curious about what your approach to getting art is. Do you begin the layout and then you sort of find art to try and fill the gaps, or do you try and get your images first?
Yeah. So I don't know how you would start layout before you have the images that you have. But here's the thing. I picked this up from League of Legends. In the role-playing in in the tabletop world, in any kind of role-playing game, art is king, because art is tied to the fantasy. The art that you're providing is a promissory note for the experience that you want, that you're offering to your players. So if you find the pugilist, and I don't mind shilling for the pugilist on the DMs Guild, because it was like one of the first community created subclasses or whole classes on its own, and it's great. It uses a point system called Moxie. Already I'm sold. But the cover of that tells you exactly the experience that you're going to have when you play as a pugilist. So there's a, if you have an artist who's working with you, treasure them, because they're the best way that you can communicate the experience that you're offering with your customers or your players. If you're relying on stock art from the DMs Guild, and there's a lot of great stuff, it's like a deep dive through old editions. The stuff you find is just really crazy and really rewarding. But I always try to look for the stuff that's going to accurately communicate the experience that people are going to get. So for town musicians at Bremen, it was pretty easy. There's a Displacer Beast in there. There's a Dryad in there. There's art of that from wherever. There is no art of a were-vulture.
No,
none that I could find. And I can't yet make it, or at least not at the quality that I would want to give people on the DMs Guild. At least not for a full page spread. So I just didn't. I'm looking for the art that really communicates the experience I want players to have.
Yeah, it is always that tough balance, especially when obviously, again, a lot of the products that I kind of work with is kind of using like stock art to kind of, fill the gaps. And yeah, no, it is tough when particularly you have. I find it's easier for monsters because, like you said, most have kind of been handled, and it's not too hard to go out your way to find like a particular goblin. I think sometimes when it comes to NPCs and sometimes again you always it's that balance of like it's nice to kind of leave it out to the sort of the DM and sort of allow them to sort of like tell their sort of descriptions and stuff like that. But and sometimes just having a picture to be like this is who you're dealing with or stuff like that. And it's just for some people like as a sort of like a visual role player, it's kind of easy to be like, yes, I can sort of kind of see who I'm dealing with, or especially if like you want to try and convey that this person is they've got like a scar over their eye patch on the other one. They've got like 3 teeth, and just like, yeah, that's someone I don't want to mess with, or whatever, whatever the message is. And yeah, you can only really get that if you kind of go out your way and commission some art, which is again, it's a
whole world out there. You start to get into the economics of publishing, which is frankly really arcane. And I think it's the skill that DMs Guild creators are starting to pick up, and it's the reason that you're starting to see much better and better stuff out there.
I think again it's kind of latching onto like your earlier point of like with the collaboration, having sort of designated layout people and stuff like that. It's kind of like it's a sign that that there are many roles to putting a DMs Guild product together, and being able to sort of like essentially have like a production line to be like, my contribution is done. Now it will go to the next stage and stuff like that, and let someone who's naturally or not naturally or has talent in a particular skill set,
who's like, gifted or motivated in this particular thing.
Yeah. It's like I said, I could spend the next 3 days staring at my layout piece of software and watch as I try and move a sentence like 2 centimeters, and watch as it moves down 2 feet and everything else moves on to the next page, or I could let someone who actually takes enjoyment out of it. No, awesome. And then I guess to kind of get the other side of the coin, then, so if the layout and art to sort of bring your adventure to life is your favorite part, is there a least favorite part that you have?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it's editing after you've released.
Ooh.
There is not a person alive who won't benefit from good editing or good beta reading, but I don't think it matters who you are or how much money you have. There will be a typo that you miss eventually. And there will be someone on the internet who's extremely happy to point it out to you. The miniatures that I did, the papercraft miniatures and digital tokens, were actually pretty controversial because I'm not an artist. I'm an amateur artist, and I dabble. I thought I was good enough to make images that would print at like about an inch high. And not, I guess there are people out there who will disagree with me. And there's, there's people who are going to point out this is, you didn't do the image processing on this one very well, and it's kind of muddy, or you missed a whole section of this, and you go, oh, how could I possibly have? It will happen to you if you are doing anything like this, especially on the DMsGuild, especially if you have a small team. It will happen to you. And it's embarrassing. And, it can require a lot of humility on your part. But, it's a thing.
Yeah,
so,
I get it. I guess it is part of the process. And I suppose there is always that fine line between obviously understanding what sort of criticism is constructive and what is the internet being, the internet.
Right.
Fair. It's interesting. I must admit, I think I myself am always like quick to sort of like, the moment you get the message saying, hey, I don't know if you meant this, but there's, a sentence that has the 4 times right at the start. And I'm like, well, that's not
that's
good.
not right.
And then you're very quick to be like, oh no, I'm sorry, there's a new version uploading now.
Yeah.
But I think it kind of like this is a conversation that I've come around to a few times, which is like, sometimes when it isn't necessarily the sort of small grammatical ones, and sometimes it's more of like, I don't think this is like, like a more of like a structural like suggestion or comment, and it's like at some point like I could keep going back and trying to fix things and stuff like that. And actually, was so interesting story that I don't know if I necessarily told this on the podcast. If I have, I apologize. But at this point, again, I've been again. This is like you get to enjoy the story twice. That's how good it is. For the Struggles of Stelming, which was an adventure that I sort of wrote with it was part of JVC Parry's JVC Parry's Presents series, where he was sort of like bringing people on to sort of write an adventure and stuff like that. I actually revisited the product after a video review by I believe it's Watson. That basically,
Rogue Watson.
Rogue Watson, yeah. Basically, he reviewed the adventure and was like, the ending of the adventure kind of falls flat. And what kind of my intention was is I'm going to spoil it. So again, it's fine. But there is an encounter with a mind flayer at the end, and my intention was to kind of keep it quite open. And even though the mind flayer is like meant to be hiding in the basement when the players first arrive, there's not necessarily the obligation that players have to just fight the mind flayer immediately. Like it's meant to be like the mind flayer is meant to be like hide there and then follow them through the house. But realistically, I was like, what? That's no. Rogue Watson kind of made some really good points. Like, as read, it feels like you would just come up to the basement, fight the mind flayer, and call it a day. So that's one of the few times where I actually went back and I sort of expanded, the introduction to that chapter to be like, here are 3 different ways that this whole thing can sort of play out. Whereas again, I think I wouldn't necessarily do that for, I would say probably like one of my first products, hypothetically, just because I feel like I guess that I'm drawing a line in the sand to be like, no, I've grown so much as a creator that to go back and revisit this product would be essentially to start from scratch.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Fair. And I guess as well. So I'm curious with the with Chilling Tales of from Chilling Tales from the Whispering Wind. How did you find I guess navigating the sort of like collaborative side? Was it the case of like it's a compendium of adventures, I imagine?
Yeah, so there's 17 adventures, all of them set either in Icewind Dale or someplace that would be appropriate to slot into that setting. Yeah, and it's an anthology of it. And what makes that one special is we did it all in the style of Monster of the Week. So we took the countdown and the motivation mechanics primarily, and added them to Dungeons and Dragons, and that's what makes that supplement, I think, unique.
No, I must admit, I haven't. I've heard really good things about Monster of the Week, but I haven't actually ever sort of played it or participated myself and stuff like that.
I can highly recommend it.
Yeah.
In fact, if you want to know more, episode 6, Making a Monster.
Hey,
Sands was on. Still my most downloaded episode, and the man took a chance on me, and he coordinated a 12-hour time difference to New Zealand. So,
wow.
Michael, if you're watching, hello, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
No, I think it was that's like a inadvertent side effect of podcasting is you either become a master or time zones just further confuse you. It's like there have been times where I feel like I know it, I'm finally on top of my time zones, I know I've got this time, and there's always gonna be that message saying, "Hey, are you good to chat in an hour?" And you're like, Did you mean 2 hours? or like, oh no, I've accidentally scheduled a 2 a.m. meeting. I'm too polite to decline. So that's only happened once though. So
man,
yeah.
Dedication.
No, interesting. Well, it's people can't say I haven't bled for this podcast. Segue onto a different show.
Yeah.
Yeah. To talk again, to kind of go from like, where you started to, your most recent work. Is there like a particular lesson that you kind of wish you'd learned like a little bit sooner?
Absolutely. And it's this. Oh gosh, I'm ripping this from somewhere and I wish I could credit my source. It'll come to me. Yeah. Act as though you have the audience that you want. There were a lot of choices that I made in some of my earlier products where I was that were the result of my thinking that nobody's ever gonna download this or watch this, and I'd be shocked and grateful if they did. I think the best advice I could give to people starting out is to hold yourself to a high standard right from the get-go. And recognize, of course, that you're going to get better over time, and you have to be kind enough to yourself to actually release the thing. But at the same time, you don't want to take shortcuts deliberately, or shortchange yourself by not giving it the effort that that you could. I think if I had done that with the contract, I certainly would have made a better cover, and I would have spent a bit more time on layout. I would have explained it a lot better right from the get-go, because it's a little bit odd if you're used to, this is what's in room 14, that style of adventure writing. And by the time we got to Chilling Tales, I was really ready to bring my A game. And working with a bunch of other people who were also ready to do that really made it a very different experience. And on the whole, I'm excited for people to find, like, I'm not ashamed of the contract. It's a beautiful little piece, and it represents where I was at the time, and I think it holds up. But I would be more excited for people to find Chilling Tales first. I think it contains some of my best work.
Yeah, I no, 100%. I kind of like completely agree with that. It's like always, like regardless of like how well a product sells or anything like that, to be able to sort of step back and be like, I'm proud of the outcome. I'm proud of kind of the work that I put into it. And no, I find it like interesting that like the sort of like, was it right as if you've kind of like found your audience, because there's like the other sort of like which advice, which is to essentially like write for you, essentially like like as if like write the content you want to see in the world, write stuff that you enjoy, and then that kind of bleeds. I feel like it's almost like two sides of the same coin. But
that might be the same piece of advice, because you want to write it for someone, and if that someone is you, then you have to believe that there's somebody else out there like you, and functionally that's the same thing.
No, yeah, fair. Unless but on the other kind of the case of like, if it turns out there is no one like you find out really quick. You're like, oh wow, turns out I'm the only person who has tries to throw I guess Displacer Beast Blink Dog fights in every room. I thought.
Hey, if that's your bag, D&D has room for you.
Yeah.
But maybe play a few games and make. This one I do have a source for. Hank Green said this, or is it John Green? One of the two. He said, make gifts for people.
Oh.
It's the best creative fuel that you have to burn, is the idea that this is for someone and not for me. Like, I want someone else to have this. I want to give them this experience. And, so do that, write it for someone, and write it in the way that you would want it to be remembered.
Oh, look at that! This happens a lot, but we got all wholesome, and I'm feeling the warm fuzzies on the inside and stuff like that. No, I think there's so much to writing on the DMs Guild, and particularly the fact that people are coming at it from so many different angles, and for a lot of people who are just kind of starting out as sort of like hobbyists to people who are like turning it into like a feasible source of income. It's always nice when you can see those products that just have that, again, have the intention to be a gift, or just have that innate sort of like creator's joy. And that's what I kind of like about like having the opportunity to kind of chat to creators, is because the amount of joy you pour into a product doesn't always necessarily get conveyed over the tweets advertising the product, because sometimes that feels more like marketing than it's just the nature of things, and to have the opportunity to like, I really want to talk about Displacer Beasts. like just every room in this adventure there is a Displacer Beast and a Blink Dog.
It's not my fault. I had to do it.
Yeah, I had a vision. See, now I'm trying to think of like how many exciting situations you could have a Blink Dog and a Displacer Beast in a room and keep it engaging. I think.
All right, I'll write a table if that's what you want.
I feel like that's the rule of three. Like, you can have 3 rooms that have a Displacer Beast and a Blink Dog in it.
And actually, I did learn this. I tried once to run a completely random dungeon. There's tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide that let you do this. The best room that I put in that dungeon was a room where there were, I think, 4 other doors. There were 4 doors in the room, the one you came in, and 3 others. Everything in the room was a mimic. And no, you just, like, if you're gonna play D&D at some point in your career, there has to be a room where everything's a mimic. Like, it's my responsibility as a dungeon master, my civic duty, to give my players this experience. Welcome to the hobby. But definitely by the 3rd time, it had worn out its welcome.
I don't know what it is. I feel like, with mimics in particular, and if you're dealing with like a new party of players, mimics are Pandora's box. Like, the moment you introduce like the players to an object that is actually a monster, they are never going to look at any other object in the world the same. They're going to
they're stabbing tables. They're
I must admit, there is definitely a character in there somewhere of like the grizzled mimic survivor who is frightened of any inanimate object. Yeah. Fantastic. So I guess kind of to pivot then and kind of looking more toward the future then. So obviously with Chilling Tales from the Whispering Wind, it's like you feel like you're really proud of the stuff you're kind of putting in there. Looking off to the future, is there like a dream project or something that you're kind of like dying to?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I'm dying to do. I've seen a couple of. There's a small market, a small group of people who are creating adventures for one DM and for one player.
Yes.
And I want to do more of that, because I think in the time that we're in now, that's going to be the easiest way to play D&D. And also it's a different way. You have to write very differently when you do that. I've got a bunch of things that I'm really excited for. I'm kind of between projects. So I'm in the stage where I'm siphoning, like going through a stack of index cards with all my ideas on them and going, is this viable? Can I spend the next 3 months of my life on this? Has somebody already done this? I had a full plan. I had a full plan to do the Home Alone movies in D&D, which would have been perfect. And someone has already done that.
I was going to say, was it there still isn't your particular spin on things?
Yeah, but they did it as good as I ever would have. So it's already there. Get it, play it this Christmas. And I will not begrudge. I don't begrudge them having done it first.
I was going to say, I'm very impressed by the idea of you having all your sort of like adventure suggestions for products on like index cards, because I think I've said it a few times. My phone notes document that is incoherent. Again, you know how like when you find like in D&D you find like the ramblings of a person in like the last minutes of their before death. That's my notes document for ideas.
Well, and I'm making it a bit more grandiose than it is. It's not actually index cards. This is one of my other best piece of advice. I use an app called Workflowy.
Ooh.
All it is bulleted lists, but they're nested indefinitely, and they're fractal. So you can have any amount of lists under lists of lists, and that's all it is. And for me, it's very easy to keep track of things that way because I never have to worry about which note it's on. It's in there somewhere. It's all lists, which I understand intuitively.
Yeah, I was going to say, was it? Yeah, I particularly like someone who that's kind of how I go about, and like that's before I make the skeleton of the document. It is very much like lists of like, okay, this is this place, this is what's kind of going on there. I'm kind of like I very much like trying to establish the order of things. I
can highly recommend it. It's super easy. It's free. It's like it's very lightweight. You can put it anywhere.
Also, I don't think I have enough fractals in my life. So an excuse. They're cool. No, interesting. And I guess what was it? I guess no, I've lost that train of thought. I guess talk about like kind of going through your kind of ideas and trying to trying to balance of like what you're thinking about working on. Is that like a particularly like hard process, or is it again looking through your fractals? Are there always ones that kind of stand out?
It's not difficult. I've noticed that my tendency is to get extremely excited about any idea I have as soon as I have it. Mm-hmm. And like as soon as I have this idea, I'm like, I gotta make this yesterday. Yeah. And that's what happens for about 48 hours. And then about a week later, I start to think this is the worst idea I've ever had. No one's gonna want this. It's hokey. And somewhere in between those two, the ideas that settle out between those two extremes are usually the ones that I can keep. But at this point.
Also, no, I was going to say, like, it's kind of fascinating because there definitely are those products that you kind of see, like, that kind of stem from like a Twitter thread of like, like, you know what, I'm gonna make a dungeon full of Displacer Beasts, and next thing you know, you're writing the product, you're like, I've committed now.
How did I get here?
And it's kind of nice to be like, I know how my brain works, and I need to give myself a week or so to actually distill whether I actually still want to do this.
Yeah.
Fair. Interesting. And then I guess with now engaging in like collaborations and things, is there anyone in the sort of DMsGuild community or like surrounding space that like particularly inspires you, or
inspires me? Is an interesting question. I mentioned the pugilist class that was written by a guy by the name of Benjamin Huffman.
Yeah.
He was one of the first of us. Like June 6th, 2016 was when that came out. And it's big and it's a great deal. Who really impressed me was Anne Gregerson.
Yeah.
She did a series on monster loot. And I think like that I think is exactly what the DMsGuild is for. It solves a problem. It's because there's gonna be someone at your table who's gonna want to loot the monster. And Wizards isn't gonna write that. It's pedantic. It's like there's too much of it. It has the potential, but it works on the DMsGuild. And more to the point, it's something that she can keep doing.
Yeah.
And she's got
the power of franchising.
yeah, honestly, she's got a great look for it. She's got great branding and design that's very cohesive. And it will continue to solve a problem for players in perpetuity. So Anne did something really smart. And I'm looking for, one of the criteria for my next idea is going to be, is it that smart? Does it solve a problem that way?
Yeah, I must admit, I was. I think it kind of always stems of like, some of these ideas kind of stem from DMing your own table and stuff. I imagine. I think the case was for Anne was literally just like, I need to deal with these players keep asking for things, and how can I satisfy them with rather than just saying. And yeah, I think as well in adventure writing and stuff like that is kind of what's nice about sometimes writing that like adventures that are tangential to the like hardcover books is that they leave a lot of like open story hooks, and just to sort of take one of those hooks and be like, well, here's now an adventure and stuff like that. Chances are that there's going to be a group out there somewhere of like what's behind that door, and they go,
yeah,
well, wizards say something. They say a nondescript person lives there, and then you have a product which is just like but no, you kind of raise like interesting point of like, yeah, the sort of the I guess the careful balance to try and come up with something that potentially does have the same sort of longevity of like the Monster Loot series and stuff like that. Having a product that can tie in with each of the hardcover books is a surefire way to do that.
Right.
And especially
I should say it depends on your goals. Because if you want to make this an occupation, part-time or full-time or whatever, then you have to think about it in that way. If that's not what you're going for, then don't stress about it. Like, I made the contract because I happen to have it. I made a thing called Fighting Dirty because I watched a lot of Three Stooges when I was growing up. Define success for yourself.
Oh no, 100%.
And meet that bar. But like, I think Anne did something that was on a business level very smart, and that's where I'm hoping to be. So that's what I'd like to do.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of mentioned earlier, and of like the idea of like if the success is the point of releasing something that you yourself are proud of, that you can look back and be like, yeah, no, I didn't cut any corners on that one. It's I think it's easy to obviously the DMsGuild being a storefront. I think it is natural for like first time authors and stuff like that to get very caught up in these sort of the money side of things, and the moment you sort of actually you have a number and it's like, well, this is the value, this is what this product is quote unquote worth, and it's like, no, you kind of have to like, again, for your own sake, it's recommended that you detach it to. Decide
for yourself. If money's what you're after, then you're going to have to be willing to go to the lengths that Steve Fiddler is going to.
I guess I was saying, if money is your thing, DMsGuild is a bit of like, I don't know, like,
maybe don't quit your day job, but
not immediately. But no, again, it becomes a whole different game, and that's kind of what interesting is talking about people, at different stages of their, like, again, career is another thing. It's like, we're all hobbyists, we all still like D&D. And it's bizarre that this hobby will pay you back in small ways, in monetary ways. So I'm very lucky to be a part of it, and I'm very glad to keep doing it. I don't know if I'm ever going to stop. I don't know if it's ever going to be my full-time job, but I'm here for it regardless. No, I feel like, again, I feel like maybe you're in the similar boat to me, whereas I don't have any intention to stop. And we'll just gotta kind of see what happens. If I'm legally told to stop, I will. I don't know what series of events will come to that. Maybe a product involving a dungeon of blue dots. Again, it's a go-to joke. Yeah, I've got like every option. But no, as I say, again, Lucas, again, thank you so much for sort of taking the time to kind of have this chat.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate what you're doing for the community. I appreciate taking the time to bring out these deeper stories and these attitudes on creativity and business in this new world as we navigate the new normal. I think you're doing a great thing.
Gosh, Sure. I need to get better at like responding to the stuff to be like, oh, because my gut reaction, which kind of tells you kind of the person I am, is like, you too, which doesn't work when, which again, well, actually, that's actually more appropriate being one podcast host to another.
Yeah. For me, you could say that.
Yeah. But I guess like the kind of wrapping up sort of questions then is like, you mentioned that you are kind of between projects at the moment, but is there anything that's coming out in the near future? And if so, where can people kind of hear about it?
Yeah, so the best place to keep up with my D&D work is on Twitter. I'm at SparkOtter. You can also find my website, scintilla.studio. That's SCINTILLA.studio. That's where all that stuff lives. The next thing I'm going to release is a companion to the Blade Singer, which is being revamped for 5th edition in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. That was published in a set of books, a set of Forgotten Realms hardcovers, which is like, it came with 3 other stories that were very similar. The Ghost Walker, the Path of the Son of Thunder, and I'm blanking, the Master of Chains. So I have all of those in one segment, one supplement that you can get on the DMs Guild. I'm going to split those up so you can get them one at a time. Ghost Walker is probably the best one.
No, again, you're never meant to pick favorites, but yeah.
Yeah, if you want a barbarian that turns into a dinosaur sometimes, Son of Thunder is for you.
I feel like that's every barbarian.
So that's what's coming out next, and after that, I'm not sure. But I have a couple of things I'm really excited about, and I'm this close to like telling everybody what they are, but I wanna keep this back. Like I think these next things really have legs, so I'm excited for them to go out. Yeah,
it's the case of once they're spoken, you're committed. This is the unwritten contract of like you've said it on a podcast. Now I expect it tomorrow. I can't thank you much for coming on and having a chit chat and stuff like that. And obviously, there'll be links to your website and your DMsGuild products, as well as the Making a Monster podcast in the description down below.
Your episode will be coming out soon of Making a Monster. I'm going to do, I think, another 3 episodes as of the time of this recording, and then go on a bit of a break before season 2. Try and change some things, do some things a bit better. And but that will bring it up to, I think, 13 episodes, 13 stories of monsters, fantastical and meaningful and memorable.
No, and again, if I haven't said this or I heard it come across, anyone listening, I highly recommend it. 50 minutes, a really sort of digestible thing to just get that monster lore, get that sort of like designer insight, and yeah, especially if you are looking at like creating monsters, it's you want to hear about the people who are dedicating time to designing them. Yeah,
and it's been a quite meaningful experience. If you do listen to Making a Monster, my recommendation is to start on episode 7. Had Alex Clippinger. They're all this. You can start anywhere. They're not in any particular order. But I had Alex Clippinger on, and he talked to me about Dagon, which D&D knows as one of the fiendish lords of the abyss. Turns out it's an ancient Canaanite deity with literally thousands of years of history and culture behind it that I knew nothing about. And that's kind of that's the mind-bending moment. That's the revelation that I want people to have when they're listening to the podcast.
Yeah, the early designers of D&D and stuff like that, they took some inspiration from some areas. Or, it's just one of the world's weirdest coincidence of you're designing this monster that happens to be a,
No, I don't think it's coincidence. It's a Matryoshka doll of meaning. So that's what I'm here for.
I feel like, you need that on like a sticker.
Hey, season 2 might have merch.
No, I must admit, the moment I get access to like a t-shirt printing machine, I'm going to make the worst stuff. And on that note, again, thank you so much, Lucas, for joining me. I have been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes and all that good stuff. My final question then: how do we end a podcast?
How do I end a podcast? Thanks for listening to Making a Monster. I'm not going to do my whole
No,
script,
dude, by means.
If you like what I'm doing and you want to hear more, check out Making a Monster at scintilla.studio/monster. Every episode is there with a transcript for those of you who want to read rather than listen. Follow me on Twitter at SparkOtter, and do not sacrifice meaning for convenience. It's out there and it's an incredibly rewarding experience. So yeah, we'll see you next week.